Okay, if I can welcome everyone to this, the 21st meeting of the Public Petitions Committee in 2019. Our first agenda item is the consideration of new petitions. The first new petition for consideration today is Petition 1760 on clear pricing for train fares, lodged by George Ecton, which calls on the Scottish Government to ensure that a requirement of future rail contracts is for customers to be given information on the cheapest possible fare as a matter of course. The petition has found that passengers can sometimes save money by purchasing split tickets, which are multiple tickets to cover a journey rather than a single ticket. The journey involves the same route, taken at the same time, but the cost is different. The petitioner states that when purchasing a ticket at a staff ticket office, passengers can benefit from the knowledge of staff to help them buy split tickets. However, when passengers purchase tickets online, via the app or at a ticket machine, they're not given this option and therefore not informed of the cheapest possible way to make their journey. Since the papers of the meeting were published, the petitioner has emailed to suggest that the committee write to the Office of Rail and Road to seek their views on this petition. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. Gail?
Oh, yes, I mean, I have a lot of sympathy with this petition. Coming from an area which has a lot of railway stations that don't have offices, and therefore I know a lot of people that do buy their tickets online, and I see absolutely no reason why that shouldn't happen the same as, you know, when you buy it from an attendant. So yeah, I think that we definitely should be pursuing this and writing to the government and ORR as the petitioner has asked us to.
Agreed, absolutely. No, I mean, it's another one of these issues, to be honest, it's a straightforward IT issue. You know, the technology is available there to be able to do this very simply, and for some reason we're not adopting it. So I'm with the rest of the committee in terms of, you need to write to the Scottish Government and try and ask why we're not doing this.
I wondered if some of it was IT and some of it's just like really weird pricing policy. I can remember going up to Inverness and the guy behind the counter saying, well, of course, if you get a ticket to Perth and then a pick it, and you saved a lot of money, they knew that. So you go off with this fistful of tickets. So that's not really to do with IT, that's to do with some odd pricing system, which is maybe something that we could flag up to them as well.
To Chair, in the deliverables here, that I think it was Alex Hines, or one of the senior directors, said actually that very question, that he discovered that there was a variation. I mean, if you look at the continent, which I travelled a lot on, I mean, they do have a basic, you know what the cheapest fare is wherever you are. You have the option. And even the point of view is that the fares are so reasonable that there's a very little difference between first class and second class, for example. So they've cracked it there. So SNCF and other railways, and Italy is another one. So I think we should really dig into that one.
Okay, so we're agreeing to write to the Scottish Government and to write to the key stakeholders, the Rail Delivery Group, Transport Focus, Advertising Standards Authority, because there is an issue about just how transparent and honest the ticketing policy is, and as the petitioner suggests, the Office of Rail and Road. Is that agreed?
And I think Abilio ScotRail as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do that one, yeah.
It's quite straightforward, but clearly an interesting issue, and also we were provided with a lot of useful information by the petitioner himself. The next petition for consideration is Petition 1762 on End the Killing of Wildlife on Grouse Moors and elsewhere in Scotland, lodged by Libby Anderson and Bob Elliott on behalf of One Kind. The petition calls for a full review of the animal welfare impacts of the use of traps and snares on grouse moors and elsewhere in Scotland. Our briefing paper for this petition explains that trapping and snaring can be legally undertaken in Scotland for the control of some types of wildlife. The use of traps and snares is subject to legal restrictions designed to prevent harm to non-target wildlife. Trapping and snaring crime is not shown as part of recorded crime statistics, as offence data cannot be broken down to that level. However, the Wildlife Crime Annual Report 2017 sets out Police Scotland disaggregated offence data showing that 15 illegal trapping and snaring offences were recorded for 2016-17. It is recognised, however, by the Scottish Government and Police Scotland that there are challenges with detecting wildlife crime, and this may just be the tip of the iceberg. In 2017, the Scottish Government set up an independent group to look at the environmental impact of grouse moors. A report is expected in the coming weeks, and the Scottish Government is committed to respond to its recommendations in the 2019-2020 programme for government. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action.
Yeah. I think that there might be reference to this in the Werrity report, which the government are now in receipt of. I mean, again, I've got huge sympathy with the intention behind this. I know that the use of legal snaring has actually gone down since tougher regulations were brought in. I mean, I've got a personal opinion on the use of that, but it's not appropriate for here. I think that also that the Eclair Committee are doing quite a lot of work on this as well, and I just wonder what my fellow committee members think about maybe passing it on to them.
Yeah, Brian?
I think added to that, I think the government are already looking at some legislation and some reporting into this as well. So they're already quite far down the line with that. So I think probably before we pass it on to the Eclair Committee, I'd be quite interested to get their view on the petition. But I think ultimately it's going to end up in the Eclair Committee. But we could probably do that in the first instance. I would have thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is an issue here, clearly. It looks as the Scottish Government is doing a lot of work on it. They are going to report. If we got an update from them, we could then decide whether, well, actually that work is being done. We would have an option to pass it on, or indeed simply to recognise the work has been done and to close the petition. But we could get that first opportunity to see what's happening.
Yeah, I think, Gerald, so there's isn't a paper about the raptors as well, if I remember right, a petition going back. There's a sort of correlation here with that.
I think there's been a number over the years,
I
hasn't there,
remember
about the whole just round animal welfare, safety, the long-term debate about hunting and shooting and whether that's acceptable or justified or not. I mean, that's where the political argument is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Can I just say as well that I suppose right into the government to ask them what they're doing over and above the recommendations in the Werrity review, because the Werrity review is just about grouse moors, but snaring and trapping is used by farmers and land managers and you know, other people, gamekeepers out with grouse moors as well.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things I got down here is Scottish Land Estates and also Scottish Gamekeepers Association. I think they should be, we may like to speak to them.
Well, I think what we'll do first of all is write to the Scottish Government, because it may be that all of this debate and discussion is going on without us replicating it through further correspondence, and then we can reflect on what the Scottish Government says, if that's agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We can then move on to the next petition, which is petition 1763 on Make the Scottish Police Federation Comply with FOI legislation, lodged by Robert Brown. This petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to make the Scottish Police Federation comply with the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002. Our briefing explains that broadly, freedom of information requirements apply to public authorities, such as governments, councils and health boards. Police Scotland is subject to the requirements of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002. The Scottish Police Federation is not. As police officers are prohibited from joining trade unions, the Scottish Police Federation was created as a staff association with responsibility for the welfare and efficiency of police officers. Trade unions are not covered by Freedom of Information legislation. It could be argued that the Scottish Police Federation is akin to a trade union and therefore should not be covered by Freedom of Information requirements. The Scottish Police Federation, however, was established by legislation and therefore could also be argued to have some similarities with public bodies. The Police Federation in England and Wales is required to comply with Freedom of Information legislation as a result of changes to the law in 2017. The Scottish Government stated in July 2019 that it has no plans to make the Scottish Police Federation subject to Freedom of Information legislation. Elaine Smith, MSP, has noted her support for this petition petition advising, quote, "I have realised that the Scottish Police Federation appears to be totally self-governing and does not conform to the standards set for England and Wales federations. I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action."
Yeah, I think that I mean the petition obviously has real merit, especially under the auspices that are down in England and Wales. They've already gone down this route. But I think from this petition, from this committee's perspective, the government have already indicated that they have no intention of changing their position on this. So frustrating as it will be both to the petitioner and to us to be able to investigate this, knowing where the government are in this, I don't know if there's anything we can particularly do with this to push this one forward.
My view on this is I don't think trade unions should come within the remit or should be caught by freedom of information legislation. Police are not allowed to have a trade union, and the only way they can have a staff association is through legislation. Is it fair that what is effectively a trade union for the police be brought under different legislation from other trade unions? I mean, it is unique. Well, there may be other.
Yeah.
I think it is unique. And my own feeling is that logically, if I perceive it as a trade union, unless I'm arguing that all trade unions should be in the same place, I don't see why they should be picked out. They don't have any choice. They're not allowed to set up a trade union under different legislation.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. The whole thing's really interesting because obviously the instance down south around that whole plebgate scenario that have brought the police down there under the auspices of FOIs. I think it's really interesting to have a look at this. But again, I go back to the fact is the government have been quite firm in the fact that they have no intention of moving down that route. So I'm not quite sure what we can do with this, convener.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think that you know, the question is preserve of, I mean, obviously release of any FOI information is entirely in the jurisdiction of the body that's being requested to release the information, and there's valid reasons why it can't be released. I know that. But I think there's some sort of parity. But I think maybe we should go back and question the Scottish Government and just double check that they're still of that view.
Well, I think it wasn't in a programme for government. They said it in July 2019, so we know what the answer is going to be. So the only question is, all we're doing is deferring a decision about whether we think this is something we would want to explore further. My feeling is that I don't think the case has been made why this quasi-trade union, unless we're arguing that trade unions should have freedom, should be subject to freedom of information, which I would argue they shouldn't be, that why would we be inconsistent? I think there's particular circumstances that have led to that in England and Wales. My sense is that that's not an issue here.
Yeah, I agree. I think the government have made it quite clear what their policy is, and it's not going to change. So I agree with Brian. I don't think that there's anywhere else that we can really, as a committee, we can take it anywhere.
No, I understand that. I think I just wanted to sort of devil's advocate on this one, because I think it's something that needs to be, you know, seriously thought. But I understand that. I mean, it's set up for the reasons it was set up, and as an association, I understand that.
Okay, I think the petition has highlighted different circumstances between England, Wales and Scotland, which has given us obviously an opportunity to reflect on this. But I think my sense is from the committee that there isn't a pressure for this change in Scotland. And some, for certain myself, I'm not sure if I would, it would require a broader discussion about how then would a staff association inside the police operate if they're not to operate like a trade union. And I don't think the case has been made for that. So my sense is we're agreeing that we would close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has confirmed, and very recently, that it has no plans to make the Scottish Police Federation subject to freedom of information legislation. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, if we can then move on to the next petition for consideration is petition 1764 on include evolutionary studies within the primary school curriculum, lodged by James Robertson on behalf of families in support of evolutionary studies. The petition calls on the Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to add evolutionary studies to the primary school curriculum. As our briefing for this petition explains, very little of the school curriculum is statutory in Scotland. The non-statutory curriculum for excellence is intended to be an outcomes-based approach whereby education authorities and schools have a great deal of autonomy on what's taught and how. Religious instruction and observance have a statutory position within Scottish education under sections 8 and 9 of the Education Scotland Act 1980. Section 8 provides that where it has been the custom for schools to have religious instruction and observance, an education authority may not discontinue this without such a proposal having been confirmed by a local referendum. Section 9 of the 1980 Act is titled Conscience Clause and provides that any pupil may be withdrawn by his or her parents from any instruction in religious subjects and from any religious observance in any public or grant-aided school. In the Curriculum for Excellence, one of the headings under which experiences and outcomes in sciences are organised is Biological Systems, which is a subheading of inheritance. The following benchmarks are relevant to these experiences and outcomes. Knows that genetic information determines characteristics such as colour of eyes and shape of petals. Knows that genetics is the study of inherited characteristics and that inherited characteristics are carried in genes and can sometimes skip a generation. In response to written question 2013, Alistair Allen, MSP, then Minister for Learning, Science and Scotland's Languages, advised, quote, evolution is specifically covered in the experience and outcomes for the sciences that form a core element of the curriculum for excellence. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. Brian?
Okay. I think for me, the issue with this is, are we crossing into the boundary of dictating to head teachers what they have to include within their day-to-day curriculum? And as said in the petition, in your sum up there, that there is a great deal of autonomy towards for schools. So I'm struggling with this one in terms of actually as a diktat to say you must teach evolution.
So, as it complete opposite of that, I say that we already say to teachers we've got our 1+2 languages, we're doing our STEM stuff, we've got religious and moral education, we've got 2 hours of PE a week. We already lay down a lot of things that we have as a basic curriculum, and then everything is added then on top of that. I think it's perfectly reasonable to write to the Scottish Government and just get an overview of what they see as already being taught in schools and how that fits in with what's the petitioner's calling for.
Morris?
Yeah, I agree with what Gail's saying there. I think, certainly from my experience, my own children in the school, our local schools, is that the teachers we've had in religious studies have been very broad-minded, and they do actually include, because I know from discussions I've had with my kids, that it's not just about, faith, it's about, the non-faith, living a proper life, good life, so I think I would see it as being, to see what the Scottish Government's going to say in reply to what we're going to ask them in relation to, obviously maybe add something into the description of what a teacher teaches, not trying to sort of dictate, because after all, these are professional people. Mm-hmm. And you tend to find that religious studies and philosophy is linked, and quite often that's something I think may well be added into. So I don't think it's about tweaking, if anything.
I suppose the question, what feels to me what the argument is whether evolution, and theory in evolution, is scientifically based, and therefore it should be taught that that is what's happened, against those who would want to teach creationism. And that's where the conflict is. And I'm assuming that the campaign for this kind of education is saying this is not just another form of belief, this is evidence-based. Mm-hmm. And their argument is that that should be put at the core of the curriculum. That's quite that's obviously in itself something that people are going to argue about. Particularly, you know, if folk of particular faith believe how the world was created. The argument here is, in the meantime, should the actual theory of evolution be taught as science, as a subject?
But I think then again, as the opposite to that, you've got atheists that send their children to school and they absolutely do not believe in creationism, but there are still some schools that are teaching it as historical fact, and that's, you know, that's not right.
Well, this is obviously
So
what this
that's,
issue is.
you know, that's the opposite end of the scale.
I think this issue is what presumably this campaign is about. It's trying to bring that out into the public domain, to have that discussion. Well, this may be what you believe. These are what, you know, we have come to take a view on scientifically is the case, and therefore the campaign, I assume, want that to be there, located in the curriculum as of right.
I think it opens up a whole conversation about the secular aspect of our education system, and, you know, how we go forward in as we're becoming a more secular society. And there is a place for religion, and there is a place for evolutionary studies, and it's just, how do we get that balance? And, you know, I think that, you know, writing to government in the first instance.
Okay, so shall we agree to write to the Scottish Government seeking its views? It may be they will, you know, they will have both, I suppose, the realities of how that would be managed if it were to be done in terms of the request from the petition itself. That would at least give us an understanding of where they were coming from. Is that agreed? Yep. Okay, in that case, if we can move on to the next petition for consideration, which is petition 1765 on Make Those in Scottish Public Office Accountable, lodged by Fiona McBride. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to ensure that effective measures are introduced which secure accountability of all MSPs and Scottish Government agencies for misuse and abuse of both parliamentary privilege and conferred authority assigned to individuals in positions of trust. Our briefing for this petition states that politicians and public servants are subject to the law, and that MSPs and those in public life are bound by specific codes of conduct as outlined in the paper. Our paper also explains that parliamentary privilege grants certain legal immunities for MSPs. In the Scottish Parliament, any privilege is conferred by or under the Scotland Act 1998. Section 41 of the Scotland Act 1998 provides that for the purposes of the law of defamation, any statement made in proceedings of the Parliament and the publication under the authority of the Parliament of any statement is absolutely privileged. This means that such statements cannot form the basis of an action of defamation. I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action.
We've got all these codes of conduct in place, Chair, and I mean, I don't think we're going to improve it. I think it's there. We're answerable. We've signed the documents, etc., etc. So, and it's perfectly clear. And I propose that we close this petition.
Any other views?
I'm quite interested in the fact that I have some parliamentary privilege. I didn't even know that. So there you go. So there you go.
We can exempt you.
I don't feel privileged at all. No, I think we probably should be, you know, writing to the Scottish Government Commissioner for Ethical Standards in public life. We should actually take a view on that. But I understand where Maurice Clare is coming from here. I can't see there being much change, but I think we should at least.
I suppose I'm not quite sure what the petition is actually. What is it? Is it that people are doing bad things and that there's not enough protection system against people doing bad things? You know, clearly there are breaches of codes, but the codes are there, and what happens as a consequence of that is the issue.
I think the way that I understood it was some sort of recompense for people that have been affected by bad legislation as well, and decision making. I think there's a bit at the end of the petition there that kind of says that, and you know, something like that goes way beyond our own personal code of conduct.
So you would have a compensation scheme where individual decision makers, we or others, would be fined if, as a consequence of those decisions, the legislation had an impact on people. But you would surely have to make a link between purpose. So if you're doing it
Cause and
knowing it's
effect.
going, you've been told all advice is this is the right thing to do, you've
Yeah.
tested the argument and you support it,
Yeah.
and then it transpires that actually there are consequences that hadn't been foreseen, it seems very unwieldy. I mean, I suppose ultimately government wrongdoing is, there are all sorts of things that can be done, but ultimately where governments get things wrong, the electorate can have their say. It's the ultimate punishment.
And, you know, again, I think that I mean, it would need to be some sort of legislation again but, you know, proving government wrongdoing would probably be quite subjective in a lot of areas.
Well, I'm sorry. Yes. I wouldn't test that argument in here.
Well, you know, so who makes these, you know, who makes these decisions? And I think that's...
So I think the question facing us, do we want at least to explore the Scottish Government, the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life, whether this is even something that would be feasible, or whether we recognise there are issues about probity and the thoughtfulness with which decision makers should make decisions, the responsibility that's on them when there are consequences borne by other people. It's not to make light of those issues at all, but whether we think there needs to be a change, do we know what that change would look like, or do we think that actually is not, it's the question we need to decide now, is something we can usefully do around this.
That in relation to writing to the Scottish Government, and following on from my point, is maybe we should check out the robustness of the current regulations that we have around the operations.
Would that not be, like, I think the legislation's fabulous because it's helped me. Somebody else thinks it's terrible because actually there's consequences for them.
Right.
It's still the decision makers haven't realised, I'm going to make a decision that will have consequence for you, but I still think this is the right thing to do. You can look at maybe in your kind of decisions that have been made in the past on health. You're making decisions round particular public policy which will have an impact on whether a particular industry can continue or whatever. I think it's quite complex.
Worms all over the place with this one.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at all the stages that a bill goes through, all the evidence that we take in committee, all the amendments that we do at stage 2 and 3, and then it goes to the full chamber, you know, and then we do post-ledge scrutiny as well. I don't know, I think the system's pretty robust.
Yeah, I suppose for the petitioner it's not just about legislation, it's about things people are able to say in Parliament. I think part of this is the issue that we're not very clear about that. David, you want to come in?
I think we should actually ask the question to the Scottish Government and the Commissioner for Ethical Standards if we can take us any further.
Right, okay.
Their views on it.
Yeah.
And see where it goes when it comes back
Fair
to us.
enough.
We could take a decision then.
Okay, is that agreed?
Yes.
Right, okay. In that case, we agree to write Scottish Government, the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life, asking for their views on the action called for in the petition. I think the practicalities of the whole question of fines and so on would be useful.
Yes.
Okay, if we can move on then to the next petition. I beg your pardon. The next agenda item. Next item on our agenda is consideration of continued petitions. Petition 1545 on residential care provision for the severely learning disabled. And can I welcome Jackie Bailey, MSP, who's attending for this item. This petition was lodged by Anne Maxwell on behalf of the Muir Maxwell Trust. At the last consideration of this petition in June 2019, the committee took evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport. During evidence, the Cabinet Secretary offered to meet with the petitioner to discuss the concerns raised in her petition and made a commitment to support research that establishes the level of need for those with profound learning difficulties. Following the meeting, the committee agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary to ascertain how this work would be progressed and whether any plans had been made to meet with the petitioner. The Clerk's note summarises the response from the Cabinet Secretary and from the petitioner. The responses seem to show some discrepancy between answers provided by the petitioner to the petitioner during the meeting with the Cabinet Secretary and the written response we received, specifically opposing answers to whether research into the needs of children and young people with profound learning disabilities will be undertaken, and whether the remit of the Joint Commissioner and Provider event planned for the autumn will include residential services with supporting medical care. I was going to ask members for comments or suggestions for action, but it may be useful if Jackie Bailey wanted to contribute at this point.
Thank you very much, Convener. I am here not because I know the petitioner, but because I am the chair of the cross-party group on learning disability. I actually undertook a Freedom of Information request to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to find out how many delayed discharges there were of people particularly with complex learning disabilities. And I have to tell you, although they are small in number, those delayed discharges are for a significant period of time. In one case, I think it was 2.5 years, and that was primarily because the social care package required for people with very complex learning disabilities is very difficult for many social work departments to fund and source. So there is a need, an absolute need, to have something that ensures that people with learning disabilities don't end up as delayed discharges in hospital, because that's not appropriate care for them. So I have considerable sympathy with the petition, because I believe that whilst Dr. MacDonald's report is very important in ensuring that people with complex learning disabilities are brought back home, it is the case that I don't think it covers this particular category, and it is that residential provision alongside medical assistance that I think is essential, and there is a gap currently in the market for that.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, my sense is that the questions that we had posed of the Cabinet Secretary, that we didn't even know the numbers, and she agreed that they would be doing that. We really need some kind of confidence that that has actually happened, and actually, you know, the review being undertaken by Dr. Anne MacDonald, there's a debate about whether that actually covers residential services. So it's almost as if the Scottish Government is answering a question that's not been asked and not answering the one that they are being asked. I think that is frustrating, and I hadn't been aware of the whole issue of people remaining in acute services, but that is part of, I think the other thing we got a sense from the petitioner's argument was that there's a resistance to the idea of residential care for people with learning disabilities, when obviously the policy has shifted, and yes, people should be supported in the community, but as a consequence of that, even when it might be the thing that would best serve someone's needs, there is a resistance to allowing that to happen, in a sense that that service shouldn't be developed at all. Brian?
I think when this petition first came in front of us, it looked fairly straightforward. It was about delivering the best care for patients, and I think, you know, everybody would agree that that seemed a very, very reasonable request. I think having you know, had the Cabinet Secretary in here and cross-examined the Cabinet Secretary, I would be interested to find out whether or not the actions that she agreed to take, whether those have actually been taken. And I think it is quite worrying that, as Jackie Bailey has says, that FOIs have to be undertaken to find out the actual numbers. I think I would have thought these kind of statistics would be something that we should be able to easily access and be understood by any health board. So I think that this petition for me has grown and grown, and I think that into a much bigger petition than initially I thought it would be. So I definitely think we need to go back and recheck with what the Cabinet Secretary agreed to do and whether that has been done. And also around the gathering of data here, I think that's something we also should be maybe perhaps writing to the government about, whether or not that's been undertaken.
Is that agreed?
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, so we are agreeing to write to Cabinet Secretary. It's really, again, to follow up on the commitments that she made to the committee, that there would be work undertaken around residential services of supported medical care, and work done around establishing the numbers, actually the extent to which this group exists and whether their needs have been met. So that's agreed. We can move on to the next petition, which is petition 1637 on ship-to-ship oil transfers and trust port accountability. The next continued petition on our agenda today is petition 1637 on ship-to-ship oil transfers and trust port accountability, lodged by Greg Fullerton on behalf of Cromarty Rising. At our last consideration of this petition in June of this year, we noted a number of continued concerns raised by the petitioner, including the accountability and governance arrangements of trust ports. The committee therefore agreed to write to the Scottish Government to respond to these concerns, as well as to outline what conversations the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government with regard to the issues raised by the petition. Written responses have been received both from the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and Islands and the petitioner are included in our papers. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action.
Yes, this is actually in my constituency, and I probably should declare an interest in having supported the no ship-to-ship oil transfers when it was a live protest. I think that, you know, this statement at number 19, paragraph number 19, that the petitioner states that there is no one to appeal to and that Scottish trust ports are public assets, and yet there is no public accountability. I think that's absolutely right. And it is an issue that I have been approached about. I would suggest that we get the Minister in to give evidence. I think that we're at that stage now where we need to hear face to face, you know, put this to him.
And is the focus of that oral evidence on the question of accountability of trusts as opposed to the... I think there's a bit of, again, the government answers a question about the conflict on reserved devolved matters, when in fact there is something else that's emerged out behind this.
That's right.
So that there is that question. We not really want... That can be... It's an important issue about safety of the environment and so on, but actually underpinning it is the establishment, the idea that the trust can make decisions without being accountable.
That's right.
Would that be the focus you would want? Right?
I agree with that. I think, you know, this petition for me has come under the auspices of accountability, and I think that, or the lack of accountability in this particular instance, and I think it has evolved into that. As is often the case, we find that there's you know, trying to actually find somebody who's accountable for those kind of decisions. So I agree with Gail Ross here that that's the direction of travel. I think we should go in and questioning the Minister on that, I think, would be the appropriate way forward.
Okay. Is that agreed? Okay. Okay, so we're agreeing to invite the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands to give oral evidence at a future meeting with a particular focus around the question of trust accountability. If we can then move on, the next continued petition on our agenda today is petition 1682 on access to specialist support for hidradenitis suppurativa, HS sufferers in Scotland, lodged by James Jimison. At the last consideration of this petition in June 2019, the committee agreed to write to NHS health boards to ask what procedures are in place to identify what services are required by HS patients and how these services are delivered. The responses we have received are summarised in the clerk's note. The committee also agreed to ask the Scottish Government to include information on HS on the Dermatology Patient Management Pathways website and mobile app. The Scottish Government has confirmed that HS is to be included on this website and app and outlined the process currently underway to achieve this. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action.
I think in this instance it may actually be quite interesting to write to NHS in England and Wales, actually, because they have a different approach. It would just be interesting to find what, you know, how successful that has been in terms of how they treat this particular condition. I'm quite interested with that kind of feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite struck by the petitioner's response, because I think having met him and got some kind of understanding along with Rona Mackay, he was a member at that time of actually the consequences of the condition and the extent to which they felt that the people who were dealing with them didn't really understand it, in the, because it was, you know, it's not a common condition and not kind of mainstream in terms of the service. His view that basically the Scottish Government is waiting until the clinicians act, rather than saying actually this is an area where we would want you to look further, and that the whole question of peer support matters, proper understanding of the condition and the need for specialist clinics. And now there is some support, I think, in the responses from the health boards to the idea that peer support would be a good idea, and that there's a case for a specialist HS clinics. I think it would be good to ask, write to NHS England, and perhaps ask the Scottish Government to respond to what the petitioner has said.
Yes, I would agree with that. Good
Yeah.
suggestions, yep.
Okay, if that's agreed, then we will continue the petition and we'll seek that information.
Yeah.
If we can move to the next continued petition for consideration today, which is petition 1689 on hepatitis C treatment targets in Scotland, lodged by Jim Clark. At our last consideration of this petition in June of this year, we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport about the Scottish Government's commitment to eliminate hepatitis C as quickly as possible. A response has been received which outlines that the Scottish Government is working with Health Protection Scotland and NHS boards to agree treatment targets which will see Scotland reach elimination well in advance of the World Health Organisation target of 2030. The submission goes on to state that the latest figures for 2018-19 show that the treatment target for that year was exceeded by over 600 additional treatments above the target of 2,000. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. Right?
I think this is the petitioner here actually has obviously highlighted an issue that probably we were all particularly aware of, and has actually, in my view, been quite successful in bringing in the outcomes of harm, because they're asking for you know, between 2,500 and 3,000 treatments, and that is already happening. So for me, I think, you know, I welcome the way the petitioner has gone about the business and brought this to attention. I think they've been very successful in that, and I think they should, you know, we should thank the petitioner for that. But I think what they've asked for is already being achieved.
Yeah,
That's fine.
I would agree. Well done.
The one thing I would ask the Scottish Government to be vigilant about would be that, I mean, part of what underpins this is that the cost of individual treatments reduced, and because the targets were round numbers, extra money had been provided, and rather than giving extra treatments, what happened was the money was used for other things. And clearly there's been some shift back if they've managed to do more. They've done more than their target, but the reason the target, the costs were reducing, and I would be concerned that there was an opportunity cost, that there was a loss in some ways because they stuck rigidly to the target. But the evidence now would suggest that actually that has shifted again because they've got to more than their target. And perhaps in closing the petition, we could write to the Scottish Government just to highlight, I think, the importance we share as a petitions committee about the potential of being able to reach elimination well ahead of the target of 2030, partly because the cost of the treatments has been reduced. So if that's agreed, then we're agreeing to close the petition under Standing Order Rule 15.7 on the basis that the Scottish Government has exceeded treatment targets in 2019-20 and is working to agree treatment targets to eliminate hepatitis C in advance of the World Health Organisation target of 2030. And I think, as already been heard, the committee would want to thank the petitioner. We think this is an issue that there needs to be continued vigilance, and I have no doubt if there is continuing concern, the petitioner will be able to bring back the petition a year after the closing of the petition, but we would thank them for their engagement with the committee. Okay, if we can then move on to the next continued petition for consideration today is petition 1693 on Independent Water Ombudsman lodged by Graham Harvey on behalf of Lowland Canals Association. The committee last considered this petition on 6 June 2019, where it took evidence from Scottish Canals. Following the session, the committee agreed to write to Scottish Canals seeking further information on critical repairs, a new advisory group and governance for the appointment of a chair. A response has now been received from Scottish Canals, as well as a further submission from the petitioner and a submission from Therese Stewart. The Clerk's note summarises both responses. In relation to the new advisory group, Scottish Waterways for All, it notes membership was extended to include, amongst others, Lowland Canals Association, which had raised the petition. The petitioner believes that the group should provide a useful forum where the concerns of users can be considered and matters of policy can be discussed. The petitioner, however, notes that due to 3 members of Scottish Canal staff being on the management committee, it cannot function as an independent ombudsman. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. Brian?
Well, I think since we received this petition, it's very obvious that the relationships have improved greatly. Since then, I think it's actually been noted in here by Graham Harvey that the new CEO, Catherine Topley, has instigated a much better communication cooperation pathways. So I think we have to accept that. I think the big thing for me was the backlog of work that needs to be done. I think it was somewhere in the region of 70 million. Not quite sure how that's going to be done. But I would also note that the Scottish Government were fairly adamant they would not support the action called for in the petition. So I think I would suggest that the petitioner has been successful in part in what they were looking for, but in the ultimate goal of setting up an independent ombudsman, then that's not going to happen. I think it's fairly adamant that's not going to happen. So I think the committee have done a really good job of almost bringing the two sides together and almost making sure that communication and dialogue has improved relationships. But I'm not sure we can go any further with it, to be honest.
I suppose what struck me about it was that the extent to which a strategy which says a tourism strategy and developing properties round about canals, there are people clearly got grave concerns with that because the focus is not then on the canals. And I was concerned that round the asset management strategy in June 2018, the priority order to invest was avoidance of catastrophic failure. Who could disagree with that? Protecting staff and visitor safety came before operability and functionality of canals. And so my concern would be, and I think was some suggestion by the petitioners, that what's happening is the way in which the business plan is diversified, that the core purpose of looking after the waterways has been downgraded around it being more of a backdrop for a tourism asset. And I think that question remains in some ways unresolved. I think I probably agree with Brian that we should close the petition. And I have no doubt whatsoever that the petitioners will be keeping a close eye on the effectiveness of Scottish Waterways for All. We'll continue to press round the maintenance of the network. And I was also concerned about the evidence we got from, we've got a submission from somebody talking about issues around antisocial behaviour, around the development of some of the canals as a place for people to come and to have events. So I think there's quite a lot here. I'm not sure if it's just the answer to those questions are about an independent water ombudsman, but it is something I think that we maybe want just to flag up to Scottish Government if we are going to close the petition. We may want to flag up to them these ongoing concerns. Jackie Bailey?
I wonder whether I could just take advantage of the fact you're considering this petition, and it is concerning Scottish Canals, because not only do they have assets in terms of the canals, they have assets in terms of properties that they rent out. I'm currently dealing with a case for 2 constituents where they are now leaving their Scottish Canals property because the state the property has been in for near a decade, I have to say, has been substandard, and there is no oversight of that. So I have considerable sympathy with the petition, but if you are writing in wider terms to the Minister, then I would hope that the committee would consider including looking at whether their properties are actually below tolerable standard and therefore fit to be let out, because I wouldn't want a government agency letting out properties that I see my constituents living in.
Okay. I think what we can do is we can write to the Scottish Government saying that identifying a series of issues, that actually would almost be subject of a separate petition. And not that I would want to encourage people to create more work for the committee, but we can flag up in a report of the meeting that that point was made. But I think what I would say to the petitioners, I think we are agreeing to close the petition. We recognise that there's a lot of the very substantial issues here. Mm-hmm. There is a sense from the petitioner that there has been movement, that a body has been set up, and that we would hope that that body is effective. But of course, if there are further concerns a year on, that is something the petitioner may want to reflect on. Mm-hmm. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, in that case, if we can move on to the next continued petition, which is petition 1712 on soul and conscience letters lodged by Laura Hunter. We last considered this petition in June of this year and noted the written submission received from the Law Society of Scotland, stating that, quote, there could be better information made available to the medical profession about what information is required in a soul and conscience certificate. We therefore agree to seek the British Medical Association Scotland's views on this suggestion, which is included in our papers. The response highlights that no concerns have been raised about the quality of soul and conscience guidance to the British Medical Association Scotland. However, providing improved guidance could, quote, help ease the pressure on a GP's time and make the task both simpler and more straightforward, and not be, quote, overburdensome or unduly bureaucratic. The British Medical Association Scotland would support the development of such guidance. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action.
I would see what take what the BME said and put that to the Scottish Government to see if that's something that they were considering to update the guidance.
What I thought was the thing that seemed to be, it's important that GPs know what's included in the letters, but the actual what was underlying the petition was that the petitioner felt that people could avoid justice, could avoid going to court and be held accountable for what they'd done because they got a letter. And the implication was that it was easy to get the letter. Yeah. And I suppose in writing to the Scottish Government, I think you're quite right. We should ask them what they think about this question of improved guidance, but we would hope that that improved guidance would address the question of the way in which the petitioner perceived it, which was it was a way of avoiding going to court, and that it was something that could actually quite easily be solicited from a doctor rather than the GP understanding actually the significance of this. It's not like just getting a note from your mother to say you're not well for PE or something. But I thought that, you know, that came quite strongly, I think, out of the petition, was this feeling, not so much that GPs didn't know what to do, but possibly they weren't recognising the significance of the impact of them agreeing to write that letter. So I think if we can write to the Scottish Government in those terms, that would be agreeable. Yeah. Agreed. Okay. In that case, if we can now move on to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1720 on natural flood alleviation strategy for Scotland, lodged by Lee Wallace, which calls on the Scottish Government to develop a natural flood alleviation strategy under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009. The petition was last considered in June 2019, when the committee agreed to write to the Scottish Government and other key stakeholders. The Clerk's note summarises the responses that have been received since that meeting. These submissions outline the current situation regarding natural flood alleviation in Scotland and what would be required for more schemes to be put in place. A number of submissions highlighted the importance of natural flood management as part of a range of measures. In its submission, SEPA states that Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 and the Scottish Government supporting guidance on delivering sustainable flood risk management emphasise the importance of NFM as part of a range of measures in sustainable flood risk management. It also states that it will be publishing its national flooding strategy in 2020, and this strategy, quote, will further reinforce the importance of working with natural processes. Neither SEPA nor the Scottish Government, however, support a separate NFM strategy. And I wonder if members have comments or suggestions or actions. Brian?
Thank you. I think it's another petition, quite honestly, convener, that there's been a strong indication from Scottish Government that it will not support this petition and it's not going to move in its position. So no matter what we particularly think we can do next, the ultimate aim of this petition will not be supported by the Scottish Government. So I don't think we've got much option here but to close the petition, but in doing so I'm wondering whether or not we can write to the Scottish Government again just to highlight the petitioner's concerns here. I don't see where we can go with this, to be quite honest.
I suppose the argument is whether there should be a separate NFM strategy, or whether do we accept that within the work being done by the Scottish Government they are including it, but they just don't want it to be a separate strategy. And are we, I mean, I find that the argument by the Scottish Government and others is persuadable that actually they do take these things into account, but they've got a broader strategy that it's trying to deal with a very difficult issue of flood.
I think that the volume of responses that we've got, CEPA, NFU, SLE, and SNH, and all the other abbreviations, have come back and said to us, yes, a flood alleviation strategy or plan is part of the wider work, but it's not a solution on its own, and therefore it is being incorporated in work that's already being done. And I think that that's our answer, really.
Am I?
Sorry, no, just agree with what you're saying about it. It's part of.
Yeah.
I don't think it's separately standing.
Are we agreeing then to close the petition?
Agreed.
Yes, I don't think we can take it any further.
Okay, so we're agreeing to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government doesn't support the production of a separate natural flood alleviation strategy, but have been clear in their evidence that they see it in the context of their broader strategy around flood and management of that, and they are developing flooding strategy in 2020. That's agreed. We can thank the petitioner for their work in bringing this petition forward and the information they provided, and again that if after a year they find that they feel there's been no progress around this whole question, they may be able to submit a further petition, but we'd want to thank them for their involvement.
Absolutely.
If we can now move to petition 1721 on a national tourism strategy for Scotland and the role of the National Trust for Scotland, and again Jackie Bailey is present for this petition. So the final continued petition on our agenda today is petition 1721 on National Tourism Strategy for Scotland and the role of the National Trust for Scotland, lodged by John Hanks on behalf of the Friends of Gaelston, which calls on the Scottish Government to meet with the National Trust for Scotland to discuss the role the NTS can play in the context of the National Tourism Strategy, Tourism Scotland 2020, and within that, the future of any trust property under threat of closure, such as Gaelston Gardens near Cardross. The committee last considered this petition in June 2019, where it agreed to write the Scottish Government, NTS, Visit Scotland, the Scottish Tourism Alliance and the Digital Media, Culture and Sport Committee at Westminster. The Clerk's note summarises the responses that have been received. The submissions outline the ways in which the National Trust for Scotland is currently involved in the National Tourism Strategy, both as a member of the Scottish Tourism Alliance and as a key member of the Heritage Tourism Group, which is the asset group for the Heritage Pillar of Tourism Scotland 2020. In its submission, the Scottish Government states that the National Trust for Scotland is an independent charity and that, as such, management of its properties is a matter for NTS and its board. Since the meetings papers were published, the committee has received a submission from the petitioner, which has been provided in hard copy to members this morning. I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. It might be useful again to ask Jackie Bailey to make a contribution at this point to help inform our thinking.
Always happy to be useful to the committee convener. Gaelston Gardens is, of course, in my constituency, and we're joined by the petitioners in the public gallery demonstrating their continuing interest in this. I was struck by the fact that it was indeed a select committee from another place, the Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, that noted the importance of gardens for our tourism offer, not just in Scotland, but indeed across the UK. I have no doubt that the National Trust will be involved in discussions, in meetings, in working groups about the National Tourism Strategy, but they appeared to be taking decisions in relation to their assets in isolation and without regard to the strategy, because of course they were considering the closure of Gilston Gardens. There are concerns arising from the petitioners that decisions taken about the gardens may be based on flawed data. Now, I'm using Gilston as an example, but this could apply to any other garden in the ownership of the National Trust. So with Gilston, they've underestimated visitor numbers. In fact, there's been a 20% rise in visitor numbers. You wouldn't know that to look at the paperwork from the National Trust.
Petition isn't about Gilston Gardens.
I know that, but I'm using that as an example, convener, because I think it demonstrates what can happen with National Trust-owned assets. No attempt has been made to count National Trust members visiting those gardens, and indeed potentially any gardens, and their contribution. So it's not just a local asset. Most gardens are indeed, in the case of Gilston, a West of Scotland asset, in the case of others probably a national asset. Members will recall that the National Trust commissioned a report by ECOS on options for the future, and I was happy to supply that to the committee. They've indicated since that they want to consider doing an enabling development, and they'll review the decision in a year. That's welcome, but it's an incredibly short timescale, and it may indeed need more time because of planning issues. However, Gilston is an example, not necessarily the only thing the National Trust will be doing. As the National Trust themselves point out, they spent something like £8 million on conservation work in 2018-19, but they have a backlog of repairs across portfolios of £46 million. Given that, clear backlog in repairs, people are naturally worried and concerned that they will consider further disposal of assets, and it would be a mistake for them not to realise the assets that gardens present for their tourism strategy. So I would ask the convener most respectfully if she would continue to keep the petition open. I think it would be useful to know about progress made by the National Trust in relation to Gilston as an indication of wider issues with gardens in their portfolio, understanding their timetable and steps in relation to those gardens, but also write to the Scottish Government asking them to consider the importance of gardens to tourism, because I'm not sure we've quite captured that. Thank you, convener.
Okay. Anyone else? Brian?
I'll just say I have a lot of sympathy for this, because it's not just about Gilston, as you quite rightly pointed out, convener, but I think we could all probably highlight similar issues within our own constituencies. I know that we have issues where in Ayrshire with some of the gardens being downgraded. So I think they're a public asset and a community asset. So I have a lot of sympathy for this petition. I wonder what we can do with this, and I'm just wondering whether we should continue to. I would definitely like to keep it open, and I wonder whether we should be highlighting the recommendations of the DCMS report on garden design and tourism to the Scottish Government. But I would certainly like to keep this petition alive.
The only point I would make specifically is that the petition asks the Scottish Government to meet with the National Trust for Scotland to discuss the role it can play in the context of the National Tourism Strategy, which has been done. This committee can't deal with an individual decision around an individual closure. So we need to ask ourselves the question. I can understand people who are campaigning to keep the gardens open will use whatever opportunity they can to make that case. That's not what the petition is asking us to do, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us as a committee to be doing that anyway. So the question is simply whether we end up in a place where the petition asks for one thing, the motives behind it are become clear, and then we just start addressing that question, a kind of a petition creep, if I might be so bold as to say. And it's not to say that we don't support or recognise the concerns you might have about an individual asset, but the petition has to be on national issues, and that bit of it has been addressed. I just wondered if the committee have a view on that.
Yeah, that's why I was highlighting the fact that taking it away from that specific issue, because you know, I've got exactly the same issues, you know, within my area as well, and I do think that, you know, it wouldn't be the first petition that's crept.
Well, we're working towards it being the last, however.
Well, it depends. I think it's that raises very important issues around these sort of kind of community assets and the whole outdoor learning thing, and access to, you know, to open space and whatnot. And I do think there's a bit of work to be done here. That's what I think.
The Scottish Government is not going to make a decision about an NTS property. No. It's not going to make that decision. So when we write into the Scottish Government, we could write about their view on the importance of gardens. That is not about what we think of this specific asset. Now, I'm obviously open to the committee's decision, as I'm just simply wanting us to be clear about not misrepresenting to the petitioner or to anyone else what the committee itself can do in this regard, and recognising the absolute rights of the petitioner to campaign in the way that they think it's appropriate to save a very specific asset in their own community.
Convener, I think what petitioners calling for, a criteria has been met by the Scottish Government, so there's nowhere for us to go but to close it. But I still think we should write to the Scottish Government highlighting the importance of the gardens to tourist industry.
Maurice?
Convening, I know Gilson very well, as you know, before I've spoken about it, along with Jackie Bailey, and I concur with a lot of what she says. I would like to keep it open, and the very simple reason is because I think generally, and I know quite a few, and I'm a member of the National Trust for Scotland, I declare that. It is also this, Gilson is in my region, but nevertheless, I think throughout Scotland there are issues, I know, with the National Trust for Scotland in relation to keeping things going, and I think we should write Scottish Government to highlight the conclusions and recommendations of the DCMS report at this stage as a general issue nationally. And see what the issues are and see how they come back on that.
Mm-hmm. Just to be clear, the Scottish Government is not going to direct the National Trust to keep anything open or to close anything. No. We can't deal with a specific issue about a particular decision. The petition itself doesn't ask us to do that. So if we were keeping the petition open, to be clear, all we would be doing is write to the Scottish Government to highlight the conclusions and recommendations. It will not make any difference, in my view, to an individual decision. It may do, but it won't actually address the fundamental point behind this, which is people who want to keep these gardens open. I don't have a view on them, but it's entirely, you know, within their right to do that. That's not what the petition asks for. And I'm not trying to get bogged down in the detail of this. I'm trying to be honest with the petitioner what actually is within our capacity to do. So I wouldn't want the petitioner to think that in writing to the Scottish Government that is going to have any impact on an individual decision by NTS on a particular property.
I'm just saying that I think we need to highlight as a committee to the government this report and get their feedback on it, because I think, and as I said earlier on, this is, you know, irrespective of Gilson, there are other issues, there are other gardens, there are other facilities. The very few of, I think it's 7 or 8 properties in the NTS in Scotland actually make a profit. I mean, obviously because there's lots of legacies and endowments involved, but I do think we should not close at this stage, and I think we should get some reaction back from the Scottish Government. That's my view, generally over Scotland. I'm
going to ask Jackie Bailey to make one final contribution, then we'll have a quick canter around the committee, see what we decide.
Thank you very much, Convener. The reason I would encourage you to write to the Scottish Government in the terms you've suggested is because I don't think the National Tourism Strategy takes enough account of the importance of gardens to the tourism offer, and indeed, if it then did, it could inform the actions of the National Trust of Scotland. So I think from, you know, a constituency viewpoint, I absolutely appreciate that the committee can't get involved in individual decisions, but in setting that strategic framework, which is a matter for the Scottish Government to inform their strategy along with the National Trust for Scotland, then I think it does shine a slightly brighter light on the future.
Gail?
Yeah, I mean, same as everybody else, I have absolute sympathy with what the group are trying to do, and have gardens in my constituency that are of, you know, national significance. I can see both sides, but, you know, in the interests of getting off the fence and trying to come to a conclusion, I think that what the petition has asked for, the National Tourism Strategy, you know, are the National Trust involved? Well, we've heard from Visit Scotland and the National Trust that they are. I don't see any value in getting anything back from the Scottish Government, as in, you know, we're asking questions about the report. I think that what we could do is write to the Scottish Government to highlight what's in the report and close the petition, having had the answer that we have asked for.
I mean, this is not about whether we think the garden should stay open or not. We have to be mindful of the time of the committee in terms of petitions and the best use of our time. My own feeling is that the petition itself, what the petition sought, has been given reassurance. What has prompted the petition remains an open question. We have to decide as a committee whether we are going to aid or make any difference in that regard. And I'm interested in the views of others, whether the compromise position that Gail has suggested, that we close the petition but we do write to the Scottish Government to highlight to them the recommendations, and that would at least then afford the petitioner whose concern is around these specific gardens to then have that conversation with Government about those proposals or that report.
I think what the petition has raised for me is the, you know, I mean, I don't know. I'm not talking about any specific. I'm just particularly saying that we all have probably similar issues within our own areas. But it's highlighted to me that is a potential issue between the relationships there in terms of governance and decision making across these types of facilities, and that does concern me. And if it is the petition committee's judgment that this should be this petition has reached its end, I would ask that we write to the Scottish Government in those terms around consideration of how that relationship, how those decision-making processes across several different sort of organisations and how that is impacting. Because I'm probably the one I'm particularly talking about is further down the line than the one that Jackie Bailey's talking about, in that it's closed and it's a disaster. So I think understanding it as a community asset, understanding it as a Scotland-wide asset, especially in terms of the National Trust, there is an issue. It might be a side issue. Convener, I'm perfectly prepared to accept that. It's not what the petition particularly asked for, but it does raise big questions for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is nothing to stop MD bringing a petition forward in those terms and those issues if they want to do so. I mean, I'm very keen that we don't divide in this, so I'm kind of trying to get some kind of sense of where we want to go. I mean, I think what Gail has suggested, that we close the petition on the basis that what's been asked for in the petition has been agreed, but that there are issues that have been flagged up through consideration of this petition that we'd want the government to reflect on, and most particularly around the recommendations of the DCMS report on garden design, since we're very aware that what's prompted the petition has been a specific issue around gardens, and I wonder if that can be agreed by the committee.
Unfortunately, I don't agree with that. I think it should be kept open. I think we do need to keep pressure on the government and the National Trust about this, and reflect on the tourism strategy in relation to gardens. I think it's also got issues about mental health in there and things like that, and people are finding a solace in these gardens. So I would not like to close it at this stage.
But we can't keep it open on the basis that you're concerned about a specific asset.
No, I'm not talking. I'm talking about national. I haven't said that. I haven't referred to Gilson. I'm talking about gardens in general, as I referred to earlier on. And I'd had a couple of meetings and discussions with the previous chairman of National Trust Scotland, and indeed the current chief executive
But Maurice, nobody's disputing here that gardens are good for mental health and well-being, and you know, as is just the outdoors in general. But keeping this petition open is not going to prevent any of this happening.
Well, I'd like to keep it open until we get the response back and see what the response back is from the Scottish Government in relation to the recommendation. That is my position.
I'm not entirely.
It's very unusual for the Petitions Committee to end up dividing in this way, and I'm concerned that we'll be keeping a petition open to do something the petition doesn't ask for.
I think it's just giving false hope to petitioners as well, you know, as in for that particular issue, which I don't really feel is very fair, to be honest, because we can't do anything about that.
Yeah.
Okay, if I could, sorry. I think I understand, Convener, where you're coming from here, and I also understand where Morse is coming from here. And I think we have, if we keep it open, we are drifting away from where what the petitioner particularly asked for, and I accept that completely. It has raised other issues for me, and within that, as I said before, within that relationship. So I'm kind of again, you know, I don't think I can ever remember a division within the Petitions Committee in the time that I've been in here. If I can be convinced that in closing the petition, we are going to write to the Scottish Government with specific asks, you know, I can be persuaded of that, I have to say. But it does raise specific issues for me that somehow or other have to be addressed.
We could, given the broader issues that have been highlighted here, refer this to the Culture and Tourism Committee.
Agreed.
And say the petition itself has been, what has been raised in the petition has been addressed. There are questions that have come out about actually the whole area around tourism, understanding this particular asset and so on. Again, they will not be able to deal with the specifics of a particular site, but if it is, we want to people to reflect on actually that broader question.
They could go in deeper in that general question. Yes,
is that agreed?
That is exactly the point I'm making. It's a bigger issue. I think it's something, and that's come out of my discussions with the people I said concerned. I wasn't happy with some of the things going on, whether it be Aberdeenshire or Otherpool or Ayrshire or whatever. It just happens. This one has highlighted it.
Okay. Yes, I think we have reached an agreement, but can I just underline that we are agreeing to refer it to the Culture and Tourism Committee because we have been persuaded that there is an issue here. But as custodians of the Public Petitions Committee, we are not the only committee that is dealing with a broad range of issues in Scottish public life. And we have to be mindful that if we spend too long on any one petition, because there are interesting things in it, there's a queue of people waiting to have their petitions addressed by the committee. And we ration either by the amount of time we spend on individual petition, or we ration by having a queue. And we do have to reflect on that, so that we wouldn't want anyone whose individual petition is important, that can be the only criterion by which we decide whether we hold on to it or not. And that's something that we need to, you know, emphasise time and again. I think sometimes petitioners think that if we're not looking at it, it's not been looked at. Whereas the whole of the Parliament has that responsibility and accountability. And I suppose the other thing to underline is that we can't guarantee in referring it to the Culture and Tourism Committee that they will give it a priority. We can simply flag up to them that we think there are some important issues here for them to consider.
Yeah.
Okay, is that agreed then? In that case, we have reached the end of what was a very substantial agenda, and I close the meeting. Thank you. Can I get you just to wait for